In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 31st, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Ohio State versus Wisconsin. Ohio State Buckeyes at Wisconsin. Badgers in late January. Big Ten basketball in cold weather. That already sounds like a game that feels heavier than a normal Saturday. You have a high-profile program walking into the Kohl Center, which is one of those gyms where the building itself seems to lean toward the home team a little bit every possession. Honestly, this matchup is less about brand names and more about whether Ohio State's shorter, somewhat banged-up rotation can keep handling that pressure for a full 40 minutes on the road, with a crowd that wakes up the moment the visitors look tired. Wisconsin comes in with a record in the neighborhood of 15-6 overall, 7-3 in conference play, and roughly 11-2 at home. So home success is not just a talking point here, it is a pattern. They have taken something like 26 of their last 30 in this building over the last few seasons, which tells you that teams do not just stroll into Madison and feel comfortable. Under Greg Gard, the Badgers have turned Kohl Center into a place where you almost have to do your own mental math before the ball tips, because their home record, roughly 130-37 over a long stretch, leans so hard in their favor that you feel like the floor is tilted. Here is the thing, that is not magic, it is habits. They defend, they communicate, and they look far more relaxed at home than most visiting teams do after the first media timeout. What makes this particular Wisconsin group interesting is that it is not the old stereotype of Badgers basketball that crawls into the 50s and suffocates the clock from the opening tip. This version scores around the low 80s per game, sits comfortably among the better offenses in the country, and plays at a tempo that is actually a little quicker than what people expect when they think of Big Ten grind ball. They stretch the floor, they attack gaps, and the big men do not just stand on the block waiting for a post entry, they are involved in actions that keep defenses working. We just saw them erase a huge hole against Minnesota, coming back from roughly 18 points down, then shooting at a scorching clip in the second half and raining in threes like they were in an empty gym. That kind of second half tells you two things: they do not panic, and they can turn a game into a run if they smell any weakness. Ohio State is not some blunt object on offense either, which is what makes this an intriguing spread conversation. They also hover in the low 80s scoring-wise and grade out as one of the sharper offensive units in the country. The difference is in how they get there. The Buckeyes are more comfortable playing from a slower base, living in half-court sets, and leaning harder on a couple of main shot creators. A lot of their scoring weight lands on guys like Bruce Thornton and John Mobley Jr., who carry big roles both as decision makers and as bucket getters. That kind of top-heavy profile can be powerful at home, but on the road, with a loud student section and tired legs, it can feel like you are asking the same players to climb the same hill over and over. On the other side, Wisconsin spreads its responsibility a bit more. They have a three-headed core with Nick Boyd, John Blackwell, and Nolan Winter all living in double figures and sharing the offensive load in a way that feels smoother over the course of a game. It is not just about who scores, it is about how many ways they can hurt you. Different guys can initiate, different guys can close, and that balance often matters when whistles start piling up or when one player simply does not have it that night. The real stress point for Ohio State, though, is the health sheet. Their report has Christoph Tilley, Gabe Cupps, Matthew Grgicic, Brandon Noel, and Josh Ojanwuna all sitting in that murky questionable zone, with Miles Harrow already locked into a redshirt year and not available. There has not been a fresh, definitive update that clears that group, which means we cannot honestly pretend we know for sure who will be ready and who will be limited. So you are potentially asking a tight core to handle heavy minutes, chase shooters, rebound in traffic, and still make good decisions late, all against a team that is both deep and confident in this building. Wisconsin, by contrast, comes in without notable injuries on the latest report and with a rhythm that looks like a team starting to feel itself in front of its home fans. That does not guarantee anything, but in a physical conference game where energy and depth become very real in the final 5 minutes, it nudges the matchup toward the side that is healthier, deeper on the perimeter, and sleeping in its own beds. As our first pick for this matchup, the Wisconsin Badgers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The scoring picture is where things get fun and a little bit sneaky. On paper, this looks like it should be a fireworks show. Both teams are sitting in that low 80s scoring range, both grayed out as top shelf or near top shelf offenses, and both are coming off games that felt like offense won the day. Ohio State recently hung a big number in the 80s on Penn State, and Wisconsin not long ago dropped a huge total on that same Penn State team, then followed it by exploding after halftime against Minnesota, throwing up a second half that looked like something from a video game. So if you just scroll through scores on your phone, it is easy to say, all right, this one is going to fly. Let me explain why that first impression might be a little loud. Tempo is the quiet character here. Wisconsin is comfortable playing at a solid pace, not hyper-fast, but quick enough that possessions do not feel suffocating. Ohio State, on the other hand, is much slower by the numbers, sitting far closer to the bottom half of the national pace rankings. One side leans toward a bit more flow, the other likes to walk it up, run sets, and squeeze value from each trip. In a gym like the Kohl Center, where the crowd can ride momentum but the home team is also very organized, the more patient style often finds a way to show up for long stretches. Then you look more closely at the defenses, and the story gets even more interesting. Yes, both teams have allowed scores in the mid-70s at times, and yes, that can make it feel like they are loose on that end. On a per-possession basis, though, they grade out as quietly solid, sitting in that respectable top tier where you are not locking people in a cage, but you are not exactly offering them layup lines either. So you get plenty of possessions that grind, with late clock jumpers, post touches that go nowhere, and long rebounds that slow things down. History between these programs also leans toward lower totals. 7 of the last 10 meetings have finished under the closing number, and when you look at those box scores, the final tallies often land in that 130s to low 140s neighborhood rather than racing into the 160s. It is not that they cannot score, it is that when they see each other, the style tends to get more controlled, more physical, and more about execution than tempo. Familiarity breeds smarter defense, and smarter defense usually trims a few points off what the raw offensive talent might suggest. You can also picture how the last 5 or 6 minutes might feel if this one is tight, which is usually the case in conference play around this time of year. Coaches in these spots do not usually want chaos, they want control. If one team edges in front late, there is a good chance we see long, structured possessions, sets that use most of the shot clock, and a focus on shot quality instead of trading quick threes. If Ohio State's rotation is feeling the weight of all those minutes because of the uncertainty around their depth, it becomes even more logical to slow things a bit, manage effort, and lean on defense to keep the game in a more comfortable scoring pocket. The one real nightmare for a lower scoring script is a whistle-heavy game where both teams basically take turns at the free throw line. That can break almost any plan for a modest total. But when you look at how these two usually play, they are not built purely on reckless rim attacks that invite 20-plus fouls in a half. They space the floor, they shoot, they post, and they mix in drives, which create stretches where both defenses can get set and possessions can stretch out. So when you put it all together, explosive offenses, slower overall tempo from one side, quietly competent defenses, and a long-term series history that has leaned toward games finishing under bloated expectations, it becomes easier to side with a scoring outcome that lands below what people might assume from the highlight reels alone. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Kentucky versus Arkansas. Bud Walton Arena on a Saturday night with Kentucky rolling in is not just a basketball game, it is a full-blown Southeastern Conference personality test. You have a program that has fully bought into its new era, a coach with history on the other bench, and a fan base that treats this matchup like a holiday that happens to come with free noise complaints. Honestly, you can almost feel the student section through the television when Arkansas gets a run going here. Arkansas is sitting as a top 15 group in the polls with a record of 16-5 overall and 6-2 in league play. And that is not some illusion created by computers. They are putting up around 89 points a night and grading out as one of the most efficient offenses in the country, which fits what your eyes see when they are humming. The ball moves, they get into early offense, and they do not waste many possessions at home. On this floor, they have yet to drop a game this season, and that includes wins over ranked brands like Tennessee, Louisville, and Vanderbilt, plus the classic Southeastern Conference grinder types like LSU. The school is literally promoting this one as a Pack the Palace type event, and that kind of campaign is not just marketing speak, it is a signal that everyone on campus has circled this date. Kentucky walks in with a record of 14-7 and 5-3 in conference play, and they might be the definition of high variance this season. There was a stretch where they stacked a 5-game league winning run and looked like they had finally figured themselves out. Then they turned around and got hammered 80-55 at Vanderbilt, which was already their 4th loss of the season by 15 points or more. That kind of profile can be fun to watch but a little terrifying if you are trusting them on the road in a building that feeds off momentum. The health report does not exactly calm things down for Kentucky either. They are missing their starting point guard Jalen Lowe with a season-ending shoulder injury, which alone changes how every half-court possession feels. They are also without front-court piece Jaden Quaintance due to ongoing knee issues. Plus, versatile wing Cam Williams is sidelined with a broken foot and only a slim chance to see the floor again this season. All 3 are still on the roster, all 3 are ruled out for this matchup, and that matters whenever the game gets into those choppy, physical Southeastern Conference half-court stretches. It leaves Kentucky leaning heavily on scorers like Otega-Oweh to create on their own, while Arkansas can send multiple ball handlers and creators at them in waves. You have a freshman centerpiece in Darius Acuff Jr., putting up around 20 points and north of 6 assists per game on efficient shooting, and he is not carrying the whole offense by himself, he is steering it. Add in the emotional twist here. This is John Calipari in his 2nd year in Fayetteville facing the very program that defined his coaching career for so long. The building has been perfect for Arkansas so far this season, and the crowd does not want a polite one-possession thriller, they want a scoreboard that makes a statement. Odds makers have treated Arkansas as a clear favorite, with Kentucky a noticeable underdog on the money line, which lines up with what the matchup suggests anyway. You have the healthier and deeper backcourt, the more consistent offense, and a home environment that punishes any stretch of sloppy play, paired against a road team that has already shown a habit of getting blown out when things snowball. Here is the thing, when you stack that kind of home court edge on top of the personnel gap and the way Arkansas has been closing games in this arena, it points toward them creating and maintaining that 2-3 possession cushion more often than not. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arkansas Razorbacks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Books have posted a very aggressive number for this matchup, the kind that basically assumes 40 minutes of full-throttle basketball with very few lulls. On a surface level, that sounds fair enough. Arkansas is around 89 points per game, Kentucky is around 81, and both teams are more than happy to run when they can actually get out in space. If you just glance at those raw numbers, it feels like you should be bracing for a track meet. But college basketball, especially in Southeastern Conference play once the calendar hits late January, does not always cooperate with that fantasy. Conference opponents know each other, scouting improves, and whistles tend to tighten up around the paint. In league games, Arkansas scoring has slid closer to the mid-80s, with opponents landing in the mid-70s, which is still plenty of fireworks but noticeably toned down from the early season blowouts. Those specific averages have moved a little over the last couple of weeks, but the pattern holds. The offense is still strong. It just lives a touch lower in Southeastern Conference play than in those non-conference showcases. Kentucky, for all the drama, actually grades out as fairly balanced. They sit around 81 scored and roughly 71 allowed per night, and when they have kept games under control this season, it has often been because their defense showed up more consistently than their shot making. So while they are capable of getting into an up and down rhythm, there is a version of this team that tries to drag things back towards something more controlled, especially when the bench gets shorter. History between these two programs nudges in that direction as well. In the 7 meetings leading into this game, only 2 have cleared the 160-point mark, and the average total for those games sits comfortably in the mid-140s. That does not mean this matchup cannot turn into a scoring eruption, but it does say that you need some very specific conditions to push it into that extreme range. Now layer in the current context for this particular night. Kentucky is thinner because of those 3 confirmed injuries, which usually forces a coach to think about minutes, foul trouble, and energy more than he would like. Shorter rotations often mean a little more patience in the half court and a little less appetite for constant run and gun sequences, especially in a hostile building where turnovers turn directly into loudness. Arkansas, on the other side of the ball, does not actually need this game to become a wild highlight reel to feel in control. If they get out to a reasonable lead, Calipari has every reason to lean into clock management, call more set plays, and turn the final minutes into a slow squeeze rather than a sprint. So you end up with an interesting contrast. The reputation of both offenses and the names on the jerseys push the total number higher. The reality of Southeastern Conference physicality, a short-handed rotation on the road, and the way these teams have actually played each other in recent years all pull things downward. When those forces tug against each other, it feels more likely that this one settles somewhere in that 150s neighborhood rather than consistently pushing into the extreme end of the scoring spectrum the market is hinting at. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Connecticut versus Creighton. Connecticut is rolling into this one playing the kind of basketball that feels organized and ruthless at the same time, while Creighton is trying to steady a season that has had more bumps than they probably expected. You have the UConn Huskies coming in with that look of a group that knows exactly who it is. They play with size, with balance, and with the kind of confidence you get when you have been winning big games for years, not weeks. It is not just that they win, it is that they tend to stretch games out, turning tight first halves into comfortable endings once their depth and physicality start to stack up. Even when they are not firing on all cylinders, they can lean on the paint, on the glass, and on a rotation that can absorb foul trouble or an off night from a single scorer. On the other side, you have the Creighton Blue Jays trying to protect home court with a very different recipe. They still move the ball well, they still space the floor, and the home crowd in Omaha is no joke, especially on a themed night where everybody in the building has been thinking about this game all week. But this is not the same version of Creighton that leaned on a towering rim protector to erase mistakes at the basket. Key big men are either gone or dealing with physical issues, which has forced some creative front-court combinations. That can work on some nights, but against a front line that actually enjoys contact and wants to live in the restricted area, it becomes a real stress test. Honestly, the contrast in how these teams win possessions is pretty stark. Connecticut is happy to grind you down with post touches, offensive rebounds, and strong positional defense, then let the guards pick their spots. Creighton wants rhythm, wants space, wants to flow into shots before the defense can load up. When the shots are falling at home, that looks beautiful. When the jumper cools off, though, the lack of reliable interior resistance and consistent rebounding can make those empty trips hurt twice because they lead to high percentage looks going the other way. There is also a mental piece to this matchup. Connecticut used to come into this building and feel that aura of House of Horrors, but once a team finally breaks through in a place like this, the next trip in feels different. It starts to feel less like a haunted gym and more like another business trip. For Creighton, meanwhile, the pressure is a little sneaky. They know they need a statement performance, the crowd expects a swing, and that can sometimes lead to rushed decisions if the game tilts even slightly in the wrong direction. When you marry that with a visitor that has been calmly taking care of business on the road, you start to see which side is more likely to stretch this margin rather than let it stay tight in the closing minutes. As our first pick for this matchup, the UConn Huskies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. This feels like one of those classic Big East nights where both teams are going to have stretches of shot making, even if one side has the more complete defense. And you have an offense that is very comfortable playing inside out, and another that is happiest when the ball is pinging around the perimeter and the crowd is lifting every jumper. Connecticut's attack is built on layers. They can start with post touches, kick out to shooters, then run ball screens that put bigs and guards in uncomfortable choices. That kind of structure usually produces clean looks, not just at the rim, but also from beyond the arc and at the foul line. If they settle into a rhythm, they tend to put up respectable numbers on the board almost by habit. Creighton, for all its defensive questions, still has enough skill and shooting to keep a game moving. Their guards and wings can score in bunches, and at home they rarely just roll over. When they fall behind, they lean even harder into pace and perimeter looks, which naturally adds more possessions to the game. It is a bit like watching a team in a video game start spamming threes when they are down. Sometimes it backfires, but it definitely speeds things up. There is a funny little contradiction with these two. On paper, you might look at some of their earlier results and think they have been a bit friendly to lower totals at times. But a lot of those quieter scorelines came when rotations were still choppy, key players were managing nagging things, and chemistry on offense had not really settled. The version you are getting now has more continuity, more defined roles, and more trust between ball handlers and finishers. That often flips games from grindy and awkward to still physical, but much more free-flowing. Here is the thing that quietly matters a lot in this kind of matchup. If the game tilts toward a whistle with drives, post-play, and aggressive closeouts, you get extra free throws and stoppages that extend possessions and stretch the final tally. If it tilts toward a shooting contest, both teams have enough weapons to string together runs that drag the total upward as they trade makes. There is always the risk of an off-shooting night, there always is, but when you look at the offensive tools on both sides and the environment they are playing in, it is easier to imagine stretches where the scoreboard operator stays busy rather than bored. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Auburn versus Tennessee, Saturday night in Knoxville. You get one of those Southeastern Conference atmospheres that feels less like a basketball game and more like a neighborhood event. A packed and checkered Food City Center, national cameras pointed at the floor, and two programs that have been bumping into each other in big spots for years all add up to a stage that feels familiar for both sides. The home team comes in sitting at 14-6 overall and 4-3 in league play, with that overtime escape at Georgia still buzzing in the background and a veteran coach quietly stacking up career win number 850. Across from them is a visitor sitting at 14-7 and 5-3, riding a stretch where their offense keeps bailing them out with another wave of shot-making whenever they look a little wobbly. On paper that sounds even, but the personalities of these teams are very different. The visitors lean hard into scoring. They are comfortable playing fast, taking early shots, and trusting that their talent will carry them when things get loose. The trade-off is that they give plenty back on the other end. They allow a lot of clean looks, and they are not exactly eager to turn games into wrestling matches on the glass, especially when they leave home. The hosts have quietly built something more balanced. They score enough to hang with anyone, but what really defines them is how stubborn they are defensively and how relentless they are on the boards. That overtime win at Georgia was a perfect snapshot. Even when the shooting came and went, they lived on second chances, ripping down offensive rebounds and squeezing every possession. It is not always pretty, but in a league like the Southeastern Conference, ugly winning travels. There is also some recent history hanging in the air. The orange side has taken the majority of the last several meetings, including a big one in the conference tournament where they sent the same opponent home in the semifinals. Those games have often felt like coin flips for 30 minutes, then something shifts late. The physical team that guards, rebounds, and stays composed tends to walk away smiling. Now layer in the building itself. Food City Center on a weekend night, with the crowd checkered out and feeling good about the season, is not a gentle place for a visiting offense that relies on rhythm. Miss a couple of early jumpers, lose a couple of 50-50 balls, and suddenly the game slows down in a way that favors the home side. In that script, the visitors hang around early, but every long defensive possession, every box out, and every noisy stop chips away at their legs and their patience. By the time you hit those final media timeouts, the deeper team that can win possessions in the half court is usually the one stretching things out. That is why the most reasonable projection here is a game that starts competitive, then gradually tilts toward the home side as their depth, rebounding, and defense start to tell. Not a wire-to-wire blowout, more of a slow squeeze where the gap widens enough by the closing minutes to reward the team that can finish possessions and handle the moment. As our first pick for this matchup, the Tennessee Volunteers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Scoring is a different conversation, and it gets fun fast with these two. You have one team that loves to run and another that has become very comfortable winning higher scoring games, so expecting a quiet, low-possession chess match here feels unrealistic. The visitors live for track meets. Their games often turn into stretches where both teams are sprinting, trading threes, and getting to the rim before the defense is set. They thrive when the ball is popping and the decision-making is quick. The flip side is that their defense rarely drags a game into the mud. They give up plenty of points, their rotations can be loose, and when they travel, that tendency shows even more. It only takes one or two hot stretches from the opponent for their games to start feeling like first 1-80 wins. The home side used to carry a reputation for grinding out rock fights, but this version is far more modern. They can still get stops when they need them, yet they are very willing to run. You see it in those recent Southeastern Conference games where scores climb into the 70s and 80s, even on the road. They push off the defensive glass, play through multiple ball handlers, and do not panic if the pace picks up. In fact, their work on the offensive boards often extends possessions and adds a few bonus points that totals bettors quietly love. If you put those two profiles together, you get a matchup that naturally leans toward long stretches of scoring. The visitors try to drag every game into something that feels like a shootout, and the hosts are more than capable of answering those flurries. You get the classic college sequence where one team hits a 3, the other answers with an and-1, and suddenly a 6-point swing shows up in less than a minute. Those runs add up, and they do not care what the pregame total was. Endgame mechanics matter here too. In a high-profile conference matchup like this, if the margin sits in that uncomfortable middle zone late, coaches extend the game with timeouts and fouls. That means free throws, extra possessions, and a scoreboard that keeps ticking even when the ball is not in play much. Even an average shooting night from deep can turn into a very lively number when both teams spend 40 minutes playing to their offensive strengths instead of trying to reinvent themselves. So when you put pace, style, and late-game dynamics in the same pot, you end up with a script where both sides have plenty of chances to score, both in transition and in the half-court, and where the total is more likely to be pushed higher than dragged lower. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. St. Mary's versus Gonzaga. St. Mary's heading into Gonzaga feels less like a regular conference game and more like an annual audit of the West Coast hierarchy. Both programs know it, the fans know it, and honestly, the players have been living this grudge for years. Before we get into what to back, it is worth framing what we are actually dealing with here. Gonzaga has that classic national power profile, with a record around 21-1 and a reputation for blowing people off the floor in their own gym. St. Mary's is sitting in that 19-3 range, right there in the national conversation, but with a very different personality, slower, stingier, and stubborn in all the ways that make favorites sweat. On the surface, this looks like the usual script: big name at home, loud building, and a national television type of stage where it is very easy for the casual bettor to say, Gonzaga at home, they will roll. But St. Mary's has been quietly building an entire basketball philosophy around making that exact assumption look silly. Gonzaga is comfortable playing in the fast lane, with an offense that lives near 89 points a night and rarely feels rushed because they like the rush. St. Mary's, by contrast, is happy to live in the slow lane, where every trip up the floor feels like someone is turning down the volume one notch at a time. Their tempo sits in the bottom quarter of Division I, and that is not an accident. They walk the ball up, they dig into half-court sets, and they squeeze as much out of a shot clock as your average accountant squeezes out of a spreadsheet. Defensively, they sit in that top 20 neighborhood in terms of efficiency and keep opponents in the mid-60s on the scoreboard, which is not just good defense, it is, we control how this game feels defense. That matters for a side, because the slower the game, the fewer possessions, and the fewer possessions, the harder it is for anyone to win by a huge margin. It is not just about pace either. St. Mary's is one of the best in the country at finishing defensive possessions, cleaning the glass, and avoiding cheap fouls while still playing physically. They do not give you many second chances, which is brutal for a favorite that relies on wearing teams down. Then there is the free throw piece, and this is where detail really becomes money. St. Mary's is hitting over 81% at the stripe this season, literally sitting at number 1 in the country. When you are holding an underdog ticket, every trip to the line feels like an exam, and this group rarely fails those. The history between these two programs backs up the idea that style is not just a theory, it shows up in the results. Over roughly the last decade of meaningful meetings, they have split the series about 5-5, which is not what you would expect if one side were outclassed. You get final scores that read like defensive clinics, numbers like 62-58, 74-67, or 58-51, games where every possession feels like it might swing the season. In that stretch since around 2020, St. Mary's has covered in roughly 59% of those matchups, which suggests the market has had a hard time properly pricing just how much they drag these games into their preferred style. Then you add this season's context, and the picture sharpens a bit more. Gonzaga recently had a scare at home against San Francisco, scraping by in a 68-66 grinder where they were forced to live in the half-court much more than they liked. That game was a little preview of what happens when someone refuses to let them run and instead makes them sit down and solve a puzzle possession by possession. Braden Huff, who has been a key piece of their offensive engine and spacing, is confirmed out with a left knee issue for several weeks. That is not some minor lineup tweak. It clips one of their more versatile scoring options and makes their rotations a little tighter than they would prefer. Graham Ike is officially marked as dealing with an ankle concern, with reports pointing toward him returning to the floor, but until we see him moving at full speed, there is at least a question about whether he can be his usual self for heavy minutes. St. Mary's, on the other side, does not have any new major injury drama beyond a depth forward who has been sidelined long-term, so their identity and main rotation are intact. Put that all together, and you get a matchup where the public logo is on one side, the home crowd is on that same side, but the structural matchup and the health picture quietly tilt toward the team getting points. The Gales are built to turn this thing into a tight, low-margin game more often than not. And in that kind of script, the cushion you are getting with them suddenly looks very appealing. As our first pick for this matchup, the St. Mary's Gales to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. If you just glance at team scoring averages, it is easy to think, all right, high number incoming. Gonzaga is sitting near 89 points per game, and on a typical night they can make even solid defenses look like they are running in sand. St. Mary's, though, has made an art form out of refusing to play that kind of game. They hold opponents roughly in that 64 to 65 point range, which plants them firmly inside the top 15 nationally on the defensive side in terms of points allowed. The way they get there is not complicated, but it is very disciplined. They slow the pace, they force you into half-court sets, they slide their feet, and they make sure help is where it should be. If you enjoy box scores, you know those slow-tempo teams often end up in scores that look almost old-fashioned compared to the current offensive era. St. Mary's lives in that slowest quarter of the country for tempo, while Gonzaga lives in the top chunk of teams that want to play quickly. So the whole total question really boils down to which rhythm wins out. History in this rivalry gives us a pretty clear hint. Since around 2020, the combined scores in their games have leaned toward the lower side compared to what odds makers project, with higher scoring results showing up in only about 44% of those meetings. You see it again and again. These matchups end up with totals that look modest for a game involving Gonzaga because St. Mary's drags the whole thing into a phone booth. This season's defensive profiles add more weight to the idea that we are more likely to get a grind than a fireworks show. Gonzaga is not just an offensive machine, they are keeping opponents in the mid-60s, and they sit in a strong defensive range themselves. St. Mary's, as mentioned earlier, is elite at finishing possessions, grabbing defensive boards, and doing it all without turning the game into a foul fest. Their offense naturally eats clock because they are happy to work through several actions, pull the ball back out, and run something again until they get the look they want. That kind of patient, stubborn approach quietly shaves multiple possessions off the game total. Injuries matter for the scoring picture as well. Huff being out removes a versatile scorer and stretch presence, which trims some of Gonzaga's ability to mix up how they attack, especially in lineups that spread the floor. Ike's ankle situation, even if he plays, can nudge the staff toward a slightly more controlled game, because asking a big man to sprint baseline to baseline all night long on a less than perfect joint is not exactly ideal. St. Mary's has its main weapons available, so their usual chew the clock, guard you like crazy plan is fully on the table. Could this still turn into a high-scoring night if Gonzaga gets hot from three or if the whistle becomes very tight and both teams live at the line? Of course, basketball is weird sometimes, and we have all seen games that made no sense relative to the matchup. But if you look at how these teams are built right now, how they have actually played this season, and how this rivalry tends to play out, the more reasonable expectation is a game that settles into the kind of grinding, possession-by-possession battle that finishes with fewer points than many people instinctively picture when they hear the name Gonzaga. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.